is a huge diversity of cartridge options available for the AR-15 platform, with limitless combinations of projectiles and loads, giving the shooter kind of a mind-blistering plethora of options to choose from when selecting which rifle chambering and configuration would be best for his or her applications. To date, there has been dozens and dozens of different cartridges that have been made to accommodate the AR-15 platform, maybe even upwards of almost 100 now. So as much as we would love to examine them all in excruciating detail, we're going to try to keep this particular conversation to just a few of the currently popular cartridges being offered commercially, so we can kind of keep it representative of the entire plethora and keep it to one relatively concise video. So if you don't see your favorite Wildcat cartridge being discussed here, we apologize for that, but we're just trying to keep it relatively concise. Simply use the logic in this information to better streamline your selection process. When you're done viewing this, you may not know every detail of every possible configuration, but you should have a pretty darn good idea of what it is you really need to consider when you make your final choice. It all really has to do with the prioritization of the cartridge dynamics most relevant to fulfilling your specific application's requirements. Although there certainly are many rounds that offer significant ballistic advantages over the mild-mannered 5.56 or 223 cartridges, ballistics alone are not always going to be the primary criteria for selecting the cartridge that will most effectively fulfill your needs. In fact, there are a few different ways to really skin this cat. So we're going to take a look at some of the most relevant criterion to answering the question, what is the best AR-15 cartridge? For the sake of being relatively concise, we're going to limit this to the 5 main criterion for determining the best AR-15 cartridge for you. What are the main things that the cartridge must offer to fulfill that application? Okay, you got to consider your external ballistics, right? Better external ballistics facilitate better probability for hitting the targets at distance, right? That's going to primarily bring in your two things, your trajectory and your wind drift, making it easier to hit that target at whatever distance you need to do so. Now, the big one is you got to consider your terminal ballistics. I mean, is your bullet going to have enough effect at range to reliably put down whatever the target is you're shooting at? That's very important. Another main criteria we really need to look at is rifle configuration limitations. What kind of weight are you willing to carry? What kind of length in the rifle is going to be too awkward for you? What kind of optics are you willing to put on here? What kind of optics are going to be required to effectively accommodate the cartridge for its max effective range? And are you willing to put those optics on your rifle? Another thing we need to look at is logistical compatibility of ammunition, components, and parts. We're talking ammunition, magazines, bolt carriers, things like that. Very important to consider for certain applications. And last but not least, how much money do you have? What is the cost going to be? Not only the cost of the ammunition, but the cost of the rifle, the related components you're going to need to keep this thing alive, the optics required, reloading equipment, etc. All considerations for answering our questions. So let's go ahead and try to apply these criteria now and navigate through the endless maze of internet blogs and discussions with the gun store clerk. All we really simply have to do here is ask the primary question. What are you using it for? Once we know this, then we can systematically prioritize which of these criteria are moved up front so that we can streamline our selection process. Really, there's one primary question we can start off with to keep this short. Considering the unprecedented sales of the AR-15 rifle in recent times due to political strife and what many folks consider to be impending doom, for 69% of you, maybe more, we can really cut right down to the throat of the matter by asking this one question. In which case, if you answer yes, the answer is pretty quick and simple and even painless. Is the rifle ever possibly going to be depended upon as a primary SHTF, collapse of Western civilization, Red Dawn scenario rifle? Is this what you're going to need for the end of the world? Will it be used for any other combat applications? That's your question. To put that into more concise terms, will this rifle ever be used for combat applications where there's going to be no surety of continuous resupply? That's your main question. If you answer yes, then it's pretty simple. Your main criteria is going to be resupply of ammunition. It's going to be very important for you to be able to find ammo any place. You're going to have to be able to have logistical compatibility with friends and foe. There's going to have to be ammo laying all over the whole planet to keep this thing fed if you're going to use it in a Mad Max scenario, in which case the chambering is quite simple, 5.56mm NATO. That is the chamber you want to have on your rifle. You can run military ammo through it then. You can run civilian 223 loads through it. You're never going to run out of ammo. That stuff is going to be laying all over the face of the earth, at least in the Western Hemisphere. You're going to have no problem keeping it fed. If you are ever considering taking this rifle on an escape and evasion deal as the grid goes down or whatever the heck it is as you're heading up to the cabin, and you might be traveling at any point with this rifle, and this is going to be your primary defense rifle, then it must be in something. You don't know if you're going to get separated from your vehicle. You don't know what could happen. You might have to jump out the window or something. I mean, who knows what can happen in these situations? Murphy will come around for a visit, and you might lose all your high specialty ammo that you needed if you had some fancy cartridge that's not going to be universally available wherever you're at. So, combat applications, that's what we're talking about. So that's a pretty simple answer. 5.56 NATO, probably the most common chambering nowadays in the AR-15 platform. Should be pretty easy to find that. Should be relatively cheap to feed it. Should be relatively easy to find enough ammo to keep maybe stockpiled or whatever you're going to do. And it will be laying all over the face of the earth any place you go. There is another combat application that could maybe give you a little more leeway on your cartridge choices, and that's as a special purpose rifle, okay? There are certain combat applications where you're not necessarily going to be constrained by resupply issues. If you have guaranteed resupply, if you're part of the military or if you're part of a police force, ammo resupply might not be that big of a deal. Also, if you're in a static defense position, okay? If you're defending the ranch or the homestead, static defense applications where you're going to be able to have relatively close to your position, wherever that's going to be, an option to resupply or reload or whatever you need to do, then you may have other cartridge choices. So let's examine some of these other possible uses real quick and see what cartridges might look really good. The designated marksman application is talking about a member of a combat team who is going to be the person who actually aims the rifle. You're usually going to have an optic, and you're going to be doing combat applications where you need semi-automatic fire, right? But you are going to be shooting maybe at medium or long range, and you're going to apply more specific precision fire. A lot of these designated marksmen still run with the 5.56mm, and then you still have the added benefit of absolute logistical compatibility should you ever get separated from the unit. There is some good ammunition available in the 5.56 chambering that can really advance your ballistic potential. The 77 grain Mark 262 Mod 1 projectiles, they offer a significant advantage ballistically at longer distances to take down targets for combat applications. There might be some instances where something like maybe a 6.5mm Grendel or some of these higher powered cartridges with better ballistic coefficients, superior ballistic performance for sure, might be highly advantageous for a designated marksman, as long as you are able to either conserve ammo or you are able to resupply. However, if at any time resupply comes up as a possible deal, you're going to probably want to stick with the 5.56 chambering. Just equip the rifle with some decent longer range ammo, and that should mitigate that problem. Now, for a dedicated long range AR-15 for specific sniper applications, where you're going to be just maybe taking one or two shots at a time, you might need the possibility of a few follow-up shots. Now some of your other cartridge options become highly advantageous. The 5.56, as logistically compatible as it may be, is significantly limited by its ballistic mildness, really. The 6.5 Grendel is representative of the AR-15 cartridges that offer a significant step up in not only power, but also they're going to give you a lot flatter of a trajectory. We can look at the chart comparison I made up here real quick of just a few different options of cartridges that we're going to use as examples. You can see the gray line here is representing the drop of the 6.5 Grendel in inches all the way out to 1,000 yards. And you can see it's quite towards the top of the pack. This thing is quite a flat shooting cartridge. That's going to make it a lot easier to hit your target at longer ranges. It's going to be more forgiving for calculating firing solution. You're less likely to miss over the top or underneath because of misjudgment of range or a failure to properly apply your holdover on your optic, okay? So that's one thing to consider. Likewise with your wind, as you can see on this next table, this is wind drift in minutes of angle. This is how many minutes of angle you would have to apply for a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind. And as you can see at 1,000, the 6.5 Grendel is beating the rest of the pack. It's only adjusting, like almost 10 minutes of angle at 1,000 yards. For the 10-mile-an-hour crosswind, and so it's going to offer a lot more forgiveness in misjudging your wind. And wind really is a thing that's going to bite you in the butt for long-range applications. That makes the 6.5 a very, very good choice, and other cartridges similar to it. You can look here at the energy comparisons, okay? Now we're looking at the different colors of your different cartridges, okay? And we have it at 250-yard increments. And you can see some of the rounds that start off with a lot of power at the muzzle kind of drop off because of a lack of ballistic coefficient. Your 204 Ruger is not quite maintaining its velocity, so the power does drop off. And when you get out to 1,000, what used to have a lot of power at the muzzle is not going to have very much power at all at max distance, right? So, but if you look at the 6.5 Grendel represented in the gray bar there, you can see that it maintains its energy very well in foot-pounds. And 500 foot-pounds at 1,000 meters, maybe a little less, 400 foot-pounds is actually quite adequate. That's still hitting about as hard as a 45 auto. So that's going to smack down your enemy quite efficiently for combat applications and even for hunting applications, which we'll get to in a minute. So the 6.5 Grendel and other cartridges similar to that offer a very efficient bullet design, like particularly the 6 millimeters, the 6.5 millimeters, those are going to maintain their energy longer, and they're going to be a lot more efficient, externally speaking, with ballistics. So you're going to really, really have an advantage in terms of hitting things when you get beyond your point-blank ranges. When you're past 300 meters, past 600 meters especially, you're going to actually be able to keep up with some of the larger centerfire cartridges that are more commonly seen in your large bolt actions. This is actually going to be very comparable to your .308 caliber with the M80 projectiles, a common military loading, so it's right in that same general category. So for pure sniper applications where your primary criteria is not logistical compatibility, because you do have continuous ammo resupply or you're defending a static position, a proprietary cartridge with a lot more power is going to give you quite an advantage in an AR-15. So for sniper applications, 6.5 Grendel and cartridges similar to that are going to be very, very effective for meeting your specific criteria, which as a sniper is going to be obviously to hit and put down your target at longer distances with a higher degree of certainty. That's not going to be your shit hit the fan rifle, to use the colloquial term. I apologize for those with delicate ears. If you're going to be using this for defense, or your primary go-to rifle is not going to be a 6.5 Grendel. You need resupply with a primary go-to panic rifle. But for special purposes, like actually hitting your target with certainty and putting it down, then these larger, more ballistically superior cartridges are going to offer an advantage. There's another special purpose application that we should cover here. There are certain applications when we're speaking about combat, such as covert suppressed fire, that really need something that's going to be kind of custom tailored for that application. And in which case we can look at the 300 AAC Blackout, certainly has its place. And if you run it with subsonic ammo and an efficient suppressor, it is going to be very, very, very quiet, and you should be able to apply lethal fire on your enemy targets out there in a Red Dawn scenario. If you have to mitigate perimeter threats or whatever you got to do in certain covert applications, that's something that you might consider there as well. So a 300 AAC Blackout has its place in that special role. If you're not specifically going to suppress that round, I don't think it offers a lot of other advantages over some of these other rounds. At least not significantly so to outdo the other priorities, but it is something certainly going to stand out as the best option for a covert suppressed platform. Okay, we're stepping away from combat applications. Let's look at law enforcement applications, like a patrol rifle, SRT applications, and in these roles, you're going to have less pressure to have compatibility because you're going to have resupply, but you're still going to want the compatibility due to cost, right? A police department is not going to want to have some fancy, expensive cartridge if the police department wants to actually train their shooters, because it's going to get real expensive to actually shoot enough to become proficient with the weapon. So in this case, law enforcement applications, they usually do use the 5.56mm or the 223 Remington platform in the AR-15 because of the logistical compatibility and cost factors. So that's where your cost is really going to come into play here. Also, you've got to consider that for law enforcement applications, you're not running around in combat. You don't need absolute penetration. You actually want limited penetration. You want to get most of the energy of the bullet inside the target, assuming it's going to be a soft skin target. It's not going to be hardened. It's not going to be wearing armor in most law enforcement applications. So they can use 55 grain soft point bullets, 52 grain soft points, VMAX bullets, something limited expansion bullets. And of course, police can always have at their disposal another magazine full of harder projectiles to mitigate armored threats if that would pop up. But primarily, police are not going to want to overpenetrate. So 5.56mm or 223 is going to be a very good choice in regards to over-penetration, because if you use the right bullets, expanding bullets, it's going to pretty much use all that energy inside the target. It'll be more lethal on the target, put it down quicker, and not over-penetrate and hit friendlies behind the bad guy. Same is true if you look at a home defense rifle. If you feel that you need an AR-15 for home defense inside your house, you're going to definitely want to use a smaller rifle. A 204 would actually probably be pretty good too. That's not going to penetrate through the walls if you miss and hit your friendly people in the next room. So limited penetration is a great option. High velocity, small bullets with a very light bullet jacket design, expanding bullets, VMAX bullets, varmint style hunting bullets are going to be great for home defense. I would not use hardball ammo or penetrating ammo in AR-15 for home defense. That's just asking to shoot one of your family members through the wall. So for those applications as well, I wouldn't get like a 50 Beowulf. I wouldn't get a 300 AAC would probably be over penetrating. Some of these heavier bullets, you're going to want to keep it light and fast and highly frangible on your bullets. And of course, for home defense, that's going to be a one-time deal. Logistical compatibility is not really an issue there. Your external ballistics are not going to be a big deal, but it's really your terminal ballistics that become the primary criteria in this question of home defense. Now, when we look at hunting, terminal ballistics are another major criteria, but this is now going to be kind of the opposite. You're actually going to want to have maximum penetration, especially in a smaller platform like an AR-15 that usually fires smaller cartridges. You're going to want to make sure you have enough penetration to reliably put down the game. You don't have to worry about over-penetration typically as much for hunting applications as you would shooting in your house. So if we're talking about small game, really you have a million options. Any of the different proprietary or Wildcat cartridges developed for the AR-15, take your pick. This is where it gets very complicated. This is where user preference comes into mind. It depends. If you're shooting small game, you really want to just match the projectile for the game. Small game, small frangible bullet, whatever. Large game, you're going to want something built a little heavier to penetrate to the lethals of the target. So for small game, really 65 grains and under if you're using a 5.56mm. If you're using a 204, any of those are going to be great for that. Any of the other proprietary cartridges are going to be just fine, I'm sure. If you're shooting long-range prairie dogs, then you might want one of the more flatter shooting. A 6.5 Grendel or one of the 6mm Wildcat rounds might be good for penetrating through wind, and it would be similar to your designated marksman, your sniper applications in those regards to maximizing on your long-range external ballistics. So just look at the criteria and think, what are you going to need to put down the game? If you're shooting a large game, your criteria for selecting the round is now going to be contingent on the penetration of the bullet. You're going to want to be, if you're shooting a deer especially, that's where you really probably want to up the game. You want to step up in caliber size. You want to go to a 6.5mm Grendel, a 300, something in that category, any of those, anything in between there. If you do use a 223 on larger game like deer especially, you're going to be very, very, very picky on exactly which bullets you're going to be using. If you use the wrong bullets, you're just going to wound a lot of deer, okay? You're going to be what they call a sloppy hunter, and you don't want to do that. So use enough gun when you're hunting, okay? Uh, it, whatever caliber is going to accommodate that, you want to use a bullet designed for that size of game. Don't try to make something that's not designed to take down a deer. It can be done. I've done it plenty of times. I know people who shoot deer right in the base of the skull with the AR-15 with the 52 grain hollow point, and it drops them like a sack of rocks. But you're going to want to have enough power to take down your deer. So for hunting, you can use the more powerful cartridges. Now for competition, likewise, your ammunition compatibility is not a big deal. However, cost might be a big deal, in which case you're going to want to go for the cheaper cartridge. So that's why 5.56 millimeter is quite popular. Now, if you're talking about precision shooting competition, sniper competition, then that would be synonymous with the sniper application, something with maximizing your ballistic potential. We're talking external ballistics. You don't need terminal ballistics. You don't need to have a heavy bullet design, but you do want to look at your drop, your wind drift, and cartridges with a good ballistic coefficient and a decent muzzle velocity are going to give you the advantage for long-range precision competition applications. For running and gunning, kind of whatever turns you crank, whatever you can afford to shoot. So that's really the name of the game when you're checking out what's the best AR-15 cartridge. And really, a lot of this can be adjusted by selection of your bullets. There are a lot of different bullets available in the 5.56 millimeter chambering. If you are questioning if that's going to be enough for your applications, there's been some bad field reports that have given a lot of old timers, especially, kind of a negative impression of the M16 platform in general, especially back in the NOM days, right? Where they're using the kind of ineffective bullets that didn't really put down the target. Even up until recent years, even special operations teams haven't had a lot of leeway in selection of ammunition. But recently, there's been a lot of new development for, and people have been listening more to the special operations teams and talking about lack of lethality in the 223 round for certain applications for combat. And that would be crossover into the hunting world as well. But there are some decent heavy bullets now available that offer a significant step up in longer distance, maybe medium range, what we would call 600-700 meters. A lot of advantage over the old conventional designs. Typically, the 55s are probably not your best ammo choice if you're running a 5.56. I like to use the 62 grain XM 855s. They give you a good cross section. They perform half decent at range. They do have very good penetration when you're talking about enemy combatants, maybe penetrating through light body armor, or talking about penetrating through magazine pouches if Russia was to invade, those pesky Russians, I'll tell you what, or the Chinese or something like that, right? So if you're fighting against an army, you're going to want enhanced penetration bullets, and the 855s are definitely a good choice for that. In the anti-terrorism roles, where they're not necessarily going to be equipped with that kind of armor, they can use different bullet designs, something more of an expanding bullet, like the Sierra Match Kings, the 77 grain Sierra Match Kings, the ones that are kind of loaded for this. If you look at the Department of Defense did kind of conclude that the 77 grain Sierra Match King bullets that were developed as the Mark 262 Mod 1s are very, very effective and give you a significant advantage at longer ranges for enemy combatants. They'll really quite effective out to 700 meters is what they concluded. There's actually a couple times when some special operators were out there and they made 75 kills with 77 rounds using the Mark 262 Mod 1s. That's that 77 grain projectile. So you have a lot of leeway in selecting what kind of ammunition you're going to use, especially when you're talking about 5.56 millimeter. There's a huge variety of ammunition available. So make sure you buy the right ammunition. So perhaps we'll do another video specifically identifying which ammo is most effective for this platform, depending on what you're going to do with it. But take a look at what you have and make sure you consider the correct criteria for whatever you're doing. All right, Rex out. We'll catch you on the next one. Still, but she hits me, disassembles my leg. I'm so aware.
Whoa.